That is recording. Okay, so power and authority in the modern world. The first dot point, if you don't remember, is survey. And it's a very general, just opening survey which looks at an overview of the peace treaties which ended World War I and their consequences. We are not going to be doing that today because it's very general and it's quite simple. Okay, but you got the work already, but that just looks at specific treaties like the Treaty of Versailles at the Paris Peace Conference, where you look at what they were and then what were the consequences. Okay, but more importantly, we're going to go straight into the focus, which is the rise, or beyond that, the rise of dictatorships. Moving on to that. Okay, you can break down, when you look at the first dash point, the dot point, sorry, of this one, welcome Lucky, into three conditions that enable dictatorships to rise. And they are economic conditions, political conditions, and social conditions. Yeah. So, for example, if you look at the left column, and this goes across to all the countries that were dictatorships at this time, so looking post-World War I. Economically, many nations, especially European nations, were struggling to repair their economies in the wake of World War I. This led to inflation, where their national currencies weren't keeping up. It led to inflation in many nations and even hyperinflation in Germany in 1924, where their currency became completely worthless. So any person who had savings in the bank in Germany during this time, gone. No more. And also the Great Depression, which occurred in 1929, crippled every economy across the world. And so this is where dictatorships come into play because they provide a response, an answer to this economic issue. You're moving on to political issues or conditions. The end of World War I led to the downfall of royal families and authoritarian rule. This led to the birth of democracy for many nations. The problem was democracy was a new concept for a lot of these nations, so they didn't integrate it appropriately or properly. Democracy wasn't established well. Plus, the economic issues made it look like democratic governments were not assertive. Because of things like inflation and hyperinflation, and then the Great Depression, which affected nearly every country in the world, the democratic governments kind of got a bit of a harsh deal where they appeared like they couldn't deal with it, where most countries wouldn't have been able to deal with it anyway. And lastly, socially, the social conditions was the economic issues led to higher rates of unemployment, and that caused massive issues socially. Great dissatisfaction resulted from that, with government's attempts to resolve economic issues, plus attempts to provide a clear direction for one's nation. So these three conditions, guys, are like the breeding ground for a charismatic ruler to come in play and establish new rule. This PowerPoint will be uploaded to Classroom, so you don't need to worry about getting every single thing down. I apologise if I'm moving ahead and anyone's typing or writing madly. Okay, so that moves then on to the next dot point within this part of the survey, is looking at the features of dictatorships that emerged in Russia, Italy, and Japan. So with Russia, Joseph Stalin, man of steel. Italy, Benito Mussolini, and Japan, Emperor Hirohito. So, Joseph Stalin, we're going to focus on the same conditions, economic, political, and social. So economically, Stalin took over complete control of the nation with economic plans to reinvigorate the Russian economy. He started to try to give the Russian people answers. Whether he actually did that, and we know that he caused extreme damage, he still, at that initial time, gave the Russian people an answer to the economic issues. Politically, Stalin established absolute control over Russia through socialism in one country. As the absolute leader, Stalin's exhibition of strength encouraged loyalty from Russian people. And lastly, socially, Stalin used terror and repression to control the masses who were a threat to Stalin's rule. And then on to Benito Mussolini in Italy. Economically, Mussolini promoted economic fascism, which was economic growth under the strict guidelines of the government. Politically, Mussolini promoted confidence in the Italian nation and government through establishing a fascist government under his rule and control. And socially, very similar to Stalin, just in a different way. Mussolini used the black shirts, which was actually an inspiration for Hitler using the brown shirts, okay, SA, a paramilitary organization to control any dissidents, so people who are opposed to him. And lastly, Emperor Hirohito. He is slightly different to Stalin and Mussolini, okay, in the sense of his maybe role. But economically, Japan was struggling as a result of the Great Depression. They were disillusioned as a result of the pushback from Western powers, and so they began to look outwards. Otherwise, aggressive expansion as a way to solve their economic woes. So China and Mongolia or Manchuria were on their hit list. Politically, democracy was on a sharp decline, which mirrored with the rise of reverence for the emperor and military influence in government. And lastly, socially, there was a huge promotion of racial superiority of Japanese people, as well as increase of Shinto religion. Why would they increase the influence of the Shinto faith or religion? Yeah, it's a direct link to the emperor. Emperor is apparently the descendant of the sun god. Okay, so these three, before we move to the Nazi regime, these three, Japan, Russia and Italy, when these dictators rose to power as a result of the conditions of social issues, economic issues, and political issues, what was some of the things, or this word starting with S I'm trying to think of, that these leaders, especially Mussolini and Stalin, were, whether it was a facade or not, they're trying to give this sense of something to the people of their nation. Starts with S, ends in Y. Security is one, and another one. Stability. Security and stability. There is nothing better for someone, a citizen or a civilian, if you're going through some really rough times economically, you're unemployed, you can barely make ends meet just to get a meal for your family, and you've got a leader who comes in and essentially is guaranteeing you that for the next foreseeable future, you're going to have security, you're going to have a job, food's not going to be an issue, and politically, there's going to be no change. You're going to have a stable government. Irregardless, I'm not trying to promote this, irregardless of the terrible things that they did as well to control that, but for some civilians, it works. And that's why their popularity rose so quickly. And we're going to look at that very specifically in regards to the Nazi regime to 1939. So we look at the rise of the Nazi Party and Hitler in Germany and the collapse of the Weimar Republic. And before we move any further, you stop it just before the collapse of the Weimar Republic. The rise of the Nazi Party and Hitler mirrors the decline or the fall of the Weimar Republic. It works hand in hand. There are other factors that play a role, but this is all relational. It doesn't happen separately. Do we understand that? Yep. If you have any questions anytime, just call out. So, the rise of the Nazi Party. So we see in 1923, the Nazi Party roughly has about 70,000 members across the entire nation. At this time, it's mostly just a noisy political party. That's more of an annoyance than anything else. Kind of like a little rock in the bottom of your shoe that's just annoying you as you walk. All right? Nothing that you take too seriously. The same year, the Nazi Party is part of, or quite a significant part of, the beer hall push, where they essentially tried to overthrow the government of Bavaria, okay, down in Munich. And this leads to Hitler's imprisonment, who was one of the leaders, if not the only leader, the big leader of the Nazi Party this time. Okay, he's released the following year, and he recruits Goebbels, Joseph Goebbels, into the party, which leads to massive, significant positive public relations for the party. They start wearing military uniforms, they start doing proper rallies, his communication skills are incredible, they move up. Organisationally, they move up. Shall I go forward a few years? In 1928, Hitler teams up with all the industrialists, especially a guy called Hugenberg. Don't get him confused with Hindenburg. They both have huge walrus-like mustaches, but Hugenberg was a big, wealthy industrialist who was pro-right politics and anti the Weimar Republic. Okay? And so they started to get financial support from these guys. And then what happens, guys, by 1930, after the Great Depression, the Nazis have now won 107 seats in the Reichstag, which is about 1/5, which is significant during this time. And it's really important, guys, to know that with the rise of the Nazi Party's SA, or brown shirts, same group of people, just different names, were used effectively to promote support for the Nazis. Simple things like they were part of the rallies. They also sometimes would go to voting stations and just stand around for intimidation reasons. And it would stop or control certain voting patterns. Okay? At the same time, we look at Hitler. He joined, in 1919, the German Workers' Party, where he plays an influential role. So, fun fact, he was actually working for the army, the National Army at this time, in 1919, and he was sent to spy on the German Workers' Party because the army was terrified of communism coming to play in Germany. So he was sent to spy, just as a normal citizen, to see if they were talking about communist, ideology. He went along and he actually it wasn't a communist, it was talking about the common worker. And he resonated so much with what they said, he joined up with the party. But then very quickly, being a very ambitious man, he became quite a significant leader of that party. Played a very influential role. So much so that by 1921, he's one of the main leaders. He changes the name of the party to the Nazi Party. Okay. 1923, he leads the beer hall push. He's arrested, imprisoned, and was released in 1924. Does anyone know what he did while he was in prison to pass the time? Wrote his book, My Struggle. Mein Kampf. 1929, the Great Depression hits, and this is where Hitler gains great popularity. Okay. Well, actually, his imprisonment. He was only known, before his imprisonment, he was only known about in Bavaria, which is in the southern part of Germany. And then when he was imprisoned, he got to speak for as long as he wanted before he got taken to prison. And he took a great advantage of it, being a great orator. And there's newspapers from all over Germany taking down everything he said. And so the newspapers all over Germany were writing about Hitler after that. So he was nationwide. He was known across the nation. But then, after the Great Depression, he gained great popularity because he was giving solutions. They were only theoretical at this time, but he was giving solutions to the German people, about how to overcome the economic situation of Germany, but also the national pride, the issue about how they want to bring back national pride. He attempted to run for president in 1932, but was unsuccessful. Who beat him? Hindenburg, yeah. Okay. And then he becomes chancellor in 1933 through some very, very cunning politics. And then what happens, guys? After Hindenburg's death in 1934, Hitler becomes a legal dictator. How does anyone know how he does it? It's going to pop up on a slide later, so we don't know. Sorry? So that was to become chancellor. Sorry? Yeah, it's the last step. It's the last step.
He merges the chancellorship, the presidency, and he becomes supreme commander of the armed forces.
Good. Okay. So, to become the legal dictator, it was a law concerning the highest states of office, which combined president and chancellor together, which therefore gave him control of the nation during emergency powers, but also the government. And he was actually a legal dictator of Germany. Crazy enough. All right? So while the Nazi Party is rising to power, while Hitler is influencing the rise of the Nazi Party himself, the Weimar Republic is collapsing. Now, I just want to clarify, this is where we get a bit confused. The Weimar Republic. The reason why it's called the Weimar Republic, so it's from 1919 to 1933, right? The Weimar Republic was just the name for Germany between 1919 to 1933. Okay? The reason why it's called Weimar was because that's where they signed the Constitution in a sleepy village called Weimar. It's called the Weimar Republic because it's the Weimar Constitution. Okay? That's the only reason why. So that's why it gets called that. So when you hear about the Weimar Republic, that just means nation, but think of government. It represents the Weimar government controlling the republic. Okay? The big reason, guys, anything negative that happened during this time, from the end of World War I, the signing of the Treaty of Versailles, the economic reparations, the hyperinflation, the occupation of the Ruhr, which is before hyperinflation from the French, the Great Depression. Anytime something went really bad in Germany, it somehow went back to, it's the Weimar Republic's problem. It's their fault. Okay? And so everything that happens, the Weimar Republic just cannot get back on its feet. Okay, so some could even argue it was doomed to fail from the beginning. All right, and so we're going to break it down to a couple of things. Democracy, Treaty of Versailles, economic conditions, threats on the left, threats on the right. Or vice versa, other way around, okay? So in regards to democracy, these are some of the reasons, guys, the main themes why the Weimar Republic failed, okay? Firstly, it was a forced democracy. Woodrow Wilson, after World War I, said he would not deal with Germany unless they became a democratic country. So they were forced very quickly to write a constitution. It was a very bad constitution. And as Nichols says, it was an inexperienced democracy. That inexperience was most evident in their constitution, where, I actually forgot to write one down here, but proportional representation was one thing, which is their voting system, which created, guys, lots of coalition governments, which means there was never any one whole majority government. It was a number of parties together to make one majority, which meant no one's ever going to agree on things, which meant government was constantly collapsing, and the Reichstag, Parliament was constantly collapsing and re-voting for new government. Okay? So significant political instability. The other one I forgot to put there, does anyone know what it was? Article 48. Very good. Presidential powers. So the Germans loved authoritarian rules so much that when they made their democratic government, they put a clause in that allowed a president to be in control as well as a chancellor that could control the government during emergency powers. So essentially it was like a backdoor sort of little entry into slight dictatorial powers. Alright? That presidential powers, guys, also gave the president power to dissolve government whenever he wanted to and call for a new election. Okay? So that, again, just shows the inexperience of democracy, but also an absolute just flaw of their democracy. It wasn't democratic at all. Okay? And lastly, during this time, because of proportional representation, small parties could get into government or into the Reichstag, which meant anti-Weimar political parties, such as the Nazi Party, gained support. They only needed to get certain votes. They got into the Reichstag. They got more popularity. And so then they were within government, undermining government. Okay? Then, guys, one of the big ones, the Treaty of Versailles, which was seen as a stab in the back. Alright? It left wide bitterness across Germany, which led to, which is a great, great quote from Corky and Stone, an ominous shadow over Germany. Okay? It made the government appear weak to the German people. There's something else I missed here as well. It's the Treaty of Versailles. There's one big clause in it that was real in regards the War Guilt Clause. Very good. The War Guilt Clause is one of the biggest ones that was a real stab in the back, but also great business for the German people. What was the War Guilt Clause? Does anyone know?
Germany accepts responsibility.
Germany accepted full responsibility for the entire war, which is completely unfair. And as a result of that, they had to then pay all reparations, which is again unfeasible, which links perfectly up with the next one, economic conditions. So the first thing, reparations from the Treaty of Versailles, led to failure to pay and the occupation of the Ruhr as a result. French occupied part of their territory, which is the biggest producer of coal. So the government decided, hey, let's support our German people striking against the French. We'll pay them not to work. Started paying people not to work. They didn't have enough money to do that, so let's just started to print more money. Let's print more money to pay them. And then hyperinflation occurred in 23. Okay? The entire economy became worthless. The currency became worthless. It was very, very bad. And it got even worse, guys. Another situation, they kind of got back on their feet for a few years, relative stability. But in 29, Great Depression hits, cripples the German economy completely, and removed any final support for the Weimar Republic. Yeah. What was that? Yeah, absolutely. Especially which class of people?
Working.
Not the working, middle class. The middle class were really disillusioned because they were the ones who were losing their savings. They were the ones who were slightly pro-democracy. They were the swing vote, and then they were the ones who swung mostly to the far right after this. And then, guys, when we see threats from the right, we mean political right. So political right plus the army, okay? And so these are some examples. The Cat Push in 1920 was when some of the army decided they were the Weimar government. They marched on the Reichstag, right? And when the government ordered their soldiers that were defending the Reichstag to fire upon the protesters, what did those soldiers say? Does anyone remember?
I didn't do it.
They didn't do it. They refused to shoot soldiers because the soldiers defending the Reichstag said, Reichswehr, do not fire upon Reichswehr. Reichswehr meaning army. And then that single moment, this is only 1 year after the birth of the Weimar Republic, soldiers from the army were choosing the army over their country. And so from the 1920, the 1 year after the beginning of this republic, it shows the power and influence of the right in this time period. That despite everything that's happened, the political right and the army have a really, really strong influence. And then you see it again in the Rapallo Treaty. Despite the Weimar Republic and everything that's happened after World War I, they signed a treaty with, who was the Rapallo Treaty with? Does anyone know? Same letter as the first word there. Russia. It was an agreement to start to secretly rearm Germany and allow German soldiers to train military strategy on Russian territory away from prying eyes, and in return they helped Russia with new technology, okay, and military practice. So it's only 3 years after the signing of the Weimar Constitution that they're trying to rearm, go back to this very military authoritarian practice. And then you see, guys, Beer-Hall Push 1923. Okay, and then the collapse of the Weimar Republic mirrored the rise of Hitler. You just see this constant push to the right. And then lastly, we have threats from left. Although never too serious, the communist faction always existed as an anti-Weimar faction. They were always a threat, but never too serious, they're always there. And I love this word from Nichols. When it comes down to the Communist Party, that their biggest enemy wasn't the Weimar government, it was actually the far right. They were still anti-government democracy, but they were very much anti-fascist, what the Nazis represented. But ironically, because they were hassling the Weimar government so much, the Communist Party assisted the rise of the Nazi Party because they took some of the attention of the Weimar government could have had against the far right, and they had to put it against the communists. Very interesting. Any questions further before we move on? So with those three, rise of Hitler, rise of the Nazi Party, the downfall of the Weimar Republic, it's all relational. You can't write about one without writing about all three. Does that make sense? All right, sweet. So, initial consolidation that you talked about before, Josh. This is very simple. 5 steps. First one, Hitler becomes Chancellor. Well, that's not the first step. He's become Chancellor. Then the first step, guys, he goes up to Hindenburg. Really, really gutsy thing to do. He goes up to Hindenburg just as he becomes Chancellor, which is their Prime Minister, and he calls for new elections. Yeah.
We're running a responsibility call it the 5 steps.
No, you could just talk. No, you don't talk about 5 steps because then it becomes a bit of a recount. But you could just still structure it that way. Just don't say 5 steps. But you could say even in your intro you could say that the initial consolidation took place in 5 specific stages. Yeah. And so the whole goal of this, guys, was that when calling for new elections, Hindenburg dissolved Parliament and would call for new elections. He was hoping, the gamble was, that because of what was going on with the economy and with the Weimar government, the Nazi Party would get more votes. So it means he would have more of a stronghold of the Reichstag. And he did. The Nazi Party won a majority. And Shepard and Lacey suggest that Hitler was determined to win an absolute majority, hence why he called for new elections. And then the same year, there was the Reichstag fire. The Reichstag is their parliament. No one really knows how it happened. A communist did get arrested. Okay, he was found on site. You could be a bit of a cynic and think that it was very convenient that the Reichstag fire occurred for Hitler and the Nazi Party because it allowed them to get more control of the government. But we'll anyway, the Nazi Party used this fire, irregardless of who did it, the Nazi Party used this fire to target communists and socialists. And Bullock suggests that Hitler took advantage of the situation. So what he did was the next step. He went up to Hindenburg and essentially stipulated that Germany wasn't safe right now. They needed to abolish or establish the Enabling Act, which he had to sign off on, that abolished most civil liberties and established the foundations of dictatorship. So they could just control the country right now until it was safe. And Kershaw states power was now in the hands of the National Socialists, the Nazis. The following year was the Night of the Long Knives. And that was Hitler leading, well, he wasn't part of it, but he mandated it. He led a purge of the leaders of the SA, which is their paramilitary group, and political opponents. So this is where Ernst Röhm, who was the leader of the SA, he started to get quite powerful because the SA was huge at this time. And does anyone know who was actually not a fan of the SA?
SS.
No, not the SS. Hey? Hitler wasn't a fan, but it's a big group that Hitler was trying to win over. He needed their support to get full power. The army.
Yeah.
The actual Reichswehr, the army, the German army, were really not a fan of the SA. And so Hitler had to get rid of them to be able to get power and get full support. And so they chopped off the heads of the SA, and the SA just disbanded. And so Chapman and Lacey suggests Hitler had to control the SA. And then lastly, Hindenburg's death. While Hindenburg was on his deathbed, he probably hadn't gone cold yet, Hitler passed the law concerning the highest state of office of the Reich, which legally made him the Führer. Very, very clever. So, moving on to the next dot point. There's quite a lot to get through, but next dot point is the nature of Nazi ideology. Okay? Now, he's got a very photogenic photo, doesn't he, for his book. I think that would make me more scared to read it than actually want to read it, but maybe it's meant to make him look assertive. Who knows? But what's that book again? What's it called? Mein Kampf. What does it translate to? My Struggle. Mein Kampf, guys, was the blueprint for Nazi ideology. It set forth in his book what his plans were for Germany, Germany's future, and his political party. And some of the things that it informed and structured were these points of their ideology. Race, the Nazi Party, the nation, war and struggle, and Führerprinzip. What does Führerprinzip mean? Yep. And what does it translate to? Pretty straightforward. The Führer principle. Good. Okay, so it's really important, guys, to understand this. Mein Kampf was the blueprint for Nazi ideology. What's a blueprint? It's a plan. It's a plan for a building. It's the entire structure. Okay? You don't have that, you don't know how to move forward. Mein Kampf essentially was that for Nazi ideology. Hence why it was compulsory for every German family, a German household, to have this book in their house. It's a form of indoctrination. So in regards to race, the big goal was about uniting all of the Herrenvolk, which translates to Master Race, good, to create a Großdeutschland. What does Großdeutschland mean? Greater Germany, good. To do this, it led to the removal or overt discrimination of races deemed inferior, such as Jews, Gypsies, Eastern Europeans, and so forth. Okay? In regards to the Nazi Party, it meant that the absolute ruling power of the German nation that would restore glory to the German nation. That's what the Nazi Party represented for them ideologically. That these guys, under the rule of Hitler, were going to get them, restore glory. Okay? That they deserve, that they truly deserve. That's what they believe. In regards to the nation, that can be understood as National Socialism, which can also be understood as the will of the nation. And in regards to the will of the nation, it means the individual was unimportant. This meant for German people that there was an unconditional surrender of the individual themselves for the good of the nation. It didn't matter what you thought, it mattered what was best for the nation, and you just had to do it. But the thing is, if you're so invested in it, you will happily do it. Okay? War and struggle. This links up with social Darwinism. It's the belief that Germany would only be able to prove their racial and national superiority through war and struggle. So when they see Jewish people as inferior, they see it as that it's perfectly for their national destiny that they're going to have to go through some war and struggle to prove that they are more superior than another race. And that's why they were so determined and strong determined belief that they were going to win. If they believed that they were racially superior, they believed they were going to win the struggle. And lastly, the Führerprinzip, or the Führer principle. Hitler was the absolute leader, and therefore all Germans showed absolute loyalty to him. Hitler is Nazism, and Nazism is Hitler.
Who said that?
I've got a feeling it's Goebbels. I'll clarify that for you. Okay? I'll clarify that, yeah. Okay, good to go? All right. So, the role of prominent individuals in the state. We're going to be focused on these four dudes, Hermann Göring, Joseph Goebbels, Heinrich Himmler, and Reinhard Heydrich. But if you were ever, guys, writing a question about the role of prominent individuals in the state, or anything, you need to acknowledge what? Who haven't I mentioned there? Hitler. That Hitler, in this power structure, Hitler is the absolute leader. That's unquestionable. You need to acknowledge that. You could even spend a bit of writing on that, talking about the Führerprinzip. However, there were other prominent individuals who played a significant role in the functioning of the Nazi state. And then you're going to go into these four guys. Hermann Göring. He was Hitler's official deputy and nominated successor. So when Hitler died, Göring was going to take over. He established the Gestapo in 1933. He was the Minister for Aviation. He was also the acting Interior Minister for Prussia. And he created the 4-year plan in 1936 to organise Germany's economy. We go over to the right, we've got Joseph Goebbels. You should all know about him. He was the Minister for Propaganda and Public Enlightenment. Gosh, that title makes indoctrination sound kind of half alright, doesn't it? Public Enlightenment. But anyway, he created and sustained the Führer myth. He's a big reason, guys, also for Hitler's success in some ways. He was very responsible for that. He was responsible for communicating any Nazi achievements. Apologies for the typos, guys. I've been doing this late at night. And for preventing any open criticism of Hitler. Heinrich Himmler was head of the SS. He was the chief of the German police, which meant that he had sole authority of all security organizations responsible for political opponents and upholding the program of terror. And he also managed the concentration camps. So a lot of responsibility here. And then Reinhard Heydrich was Himmler's deputy. He was head of the Reich Main Security Office. He had formal control of the Gestapo and police force. And he was also responsible for the removal of non-German populations from German-occupied territories. So essentially when Germany took over a new territory, he was responsible for going in there and they got rid of anyone who was non-German. So German people could move in. Yeah, pretty rough. So there you go. So there are 4 people you can talk about. You've got information you can talk about the role they played. Okay? It's also good to point out that it never hurts to bring out that as an absolute leader, some historians, there's some debate around the kind of leadership style Hitler had in regards to maintaining control over these prominent individuals. And one debate is that Hitler created quite a bit of chaos as a leader in an effort to make these prominent leaders or individuals compete for roles in the state. If there's never that kind of surety about your role, you're going to work harder to stay there. Yeah. So, then this one, the various methods used by the Nazi regime to exercise control. 6 areas in that dash point, or dot point, sorry. The 6 dash points are laws, censorship, repression, terror, propaganda, cult of personality. So, these are just some laws you can refer to, all right, as to how they exercise control. Again, the first one, the law concerning the highest state of the office of the Reich. That gave Hitler absolute control. He was president and chancellor, and he controlled the army. Pretty good gig. Big one, editorial law, 1933. Does anyone have a guess what that might be?
You can edit the newspapers and censor the newspapers?
Yep. Anything that was going to be, correct. Anything that was going to be written had to again go through the DNB, the German News Bureau. So they had their own bureau after a while, because there's no point having independent papers if they're going to control everything that's written. The Nuremberg laws in 1935, does anyone know what they who they're targeted?
Jewish workers.
Yep. Well, there's developed over time and just Jewish populations, yeah? And then Reich citizenship laws. They're pretty bad too, yeah.
What was it?
Well, it's a whole, any minorities that's targeting. So that's where you're going things like these two, the last two. That's when you start to get tests put in to prove that you were racially pure. You had to be able to prove that all 4 of your grandparents were Aryan German. And then you would get on your little the identification card, it would stipulate that really clearly. If you couldn't prove one of your grandparents' identities, then you weren't like blacklisted, but it was a different grade you got. And fun fact, Hitler was never able to prove that he was racially pure Aryan. Well, Austria, they considered German-speaking people, so that wasn't the issue. He couldn't prove the identity of 1 or 2 of his grandparents. So therefore, he couldn't prove that he was... So the cynics out there say he could have been Jewish for all we know. We just don't. He doesn't know. But yeah, very interesting. So, in regards to censorship, the Nazi government, guys, controlled all communication. Anything on the radio, anything in the newspaper, anything on film, any major events, they were censored. Goebbels, he created and controlled public opinion. We're going to look at a source later, but he has this great one where he essentially, Goebbels was he was very arrogant, but he was highly intelligent, and he never acknowledged it outright, but in his writings he did later. He looked down on just German people in general, intellectually. And so his thing was, one of his arguments was, German people are stupid. The average person is stupid. Therefore, keep things simple, repeat it, and then they will start to believe it. That was his propaganda approach. Repetition. And then this is what he did. He started to create public opinion. Because what everyone saw and heard was the same thing. Everyone's singing from the same choir sheet. Same song sheet, yeah. So, it got even worse, guys, with book burnings. All literature written by Jewish authors or any other minorities that were a threat to the Nazi state were destroyed. Kids were always welcome to those book burnings as part of their indoctrination. In regards to repression and terror, the Nazi regime used terror to control the masses. And that's a great quote from Himmler. The best political weapon is terror. Keeps everyone in line. The SS and Gestapo terrorized the internal and external populations, and enemies of the state, such as Jews, were used as an example. And propaganda was a huge one. You cannot underestimate the power of propaganda. It was led by Goebbels, and propaganda played a very significant role. It served to denounce the enemy, promote the Nazi Party, and revere Hitler. Radio, film, literature, press, and rallies, they were all examples of forms of propaganda. And Welch suggests that the Nazi regime used propaganda effectively to create public opinion. And lastly, cult of personality. Hitler was promoted, especially through Goebbels, as a savior of Germany, and this led to what is known as the Führer myth. You need to talk about that in regards to the cult of personality. Again, Hitler is Nazism, and Nazism is Hitler. There was absolute love of one's nation. So that quote there, refers to this idea that absolute love of one's nation equates to absolute love for the Führer. You cannot love Germany without loving Hitler, and you cannot love Hitler without loving Germany. So essentially, you can't. They come together, 2 for 1. So, you're doing well, guys. In regards to the impact of the Nazi regime on life, 6 again, cultural expression, women, workers, youth, religion, minorities. So I'm going to race through this, guys. But cultural expression, Volksgemeinschaft, which means people's community. That was one big part of that they try to do with the society or culture of Germany, is that all sectors of society were harmoniously working together towards a national goal. Whatever the national goal was, it didn't matter who you were. If you're all German, you all work together. That was the goal. And the other one was Gleichschaltung, which means coordination. The idea about transforming the Nazi state into one of total obedience. In essence, an absolute totalitarian state. That is the cultural expression. That's what was trying to happen. In regards to women, the Nazis viewed women in a very, very traditional role. It can be considered the 3 Ks. And don't go Ku Klux Klan, but 3 Ks. Kinder, children. Their main goal was to give birth to as many racially pure children as possible. Kutscher, is church, which means go to church. And Kirche, means kitchen. Be in the kitchen. Okay, I feel like we're just taking a few steps back in regards to rights for women, but that was the main thing they preached for women in Germany. Now, this one, the church one's ironic because Hitler saw Christianity as an opponent to his control of Germany. But again, a lot of Germans were Christian, Protestants especially, and so you got to play with what's in front of you. In a sense, you got to be smart. Don't make Christianity an enemy. But the big one there, guys, is children. They made a big deal about children. So much so that Hitler was essentially saying to women that, when you give birth to a child, when you give birth, every time you give birth to a child, you're fighting in the war. Kind of, that's your contribution to the war effort. Okay? Hitler, the Nazi Party, every single dictator, every nation knows the workers are indispensable to long-term goals of the Nazi state. However, Hitler saw and understood the great power workers had in the sheer numbers of them and saw that they could be a great threat. So one thing he did was in 1933, he disbanded all worker unions, which meant they couldn't unite around a common goal against the government. Yeah? It allowed him to have greater control of workers. Roberts suggests that although they were living in a dictatorship, the German worker was earning a comparably good income. So if you're looking at impact on life under the Nazi regime, you don't always have to go negative, even though there's a lot of negative. But it doesn't hurt if you're writing a response, guys, to acknowledge something positive. You go, you know what, despite the limited rights to, protest for fairer, whatever it's wages or conditions, Roberts suggests that they actually had a pretty good income compared to other nations. It's a bit sophisticated to do that, to be able to show different reasons. In regards to youth, guys, again, youth were extremely important for the continuation of Hitler's legacy. The 1,000-year Reich is what his plans were. So he established the Hitler League, which was for the boys, in 1926. And then he established the League of German Girls in 1930, where essentially they were getting indoctrinated, they were getting physically trained, so they could be part of, especially the Hitler League, the top boys for that academically examined, physically examined, they would usually go into the SS. And so that's why the SS was so hardcore, because if you got the boys being there from 1926 or a little bit later, and then the war starts, the SS, those boys may have been part of the Hitler Youth for 10 years. From the age of 10, even younger. And they get to about 20, and they're like ripe for the picking, because they're heavily indoctrinated. And the SS were the majority who were looking after the concentration camps. So that kind of makes sense. Rempel states, quote, social, political, and military resilience of the Third Reich was intrinsically connected to the Hitler Youth. Everything relied on them. 2 more. Hitler saw Christianity as a direct challenge to his absolute rule. Despite this, Hitler signed a concordat, or a treaty, with the Catholic Church in 1933, Okay. However, some Protestant clergy opposed Hitler's rule, and they were arrested when they did protest to that. So Hitler's relationship with Christianity was very tumultuous. 37, I think it was, the Catholic Church, I think probably under some criticism, essentially said that Hitler had violated their treaty, and they both pulled out of it. And so that's when they made their separation. And lastly, minorities. Jews were the major target from the Nazi state, which led to them being recognized as second-class citizens, and this can be evident from the Nuremberg laws in 1933, but also Kristallnacht in 1938. What's Kristallnacht? Does anyone remember? Night of the Broken Glass. Good. Where it was active and very visible. The first time was actually very visible, where they did it unapologetically, a complete boycott of Jewish business and destruction of synagogues. So there's actual photos and recordings of it. And so this is where people in America, Jewish Americans, were protesting because they couldn't believe what they were seeing in the newspaper. And then it got to the point where, lastly, they started to be removed from German society, physically removed. Homosexuals were also discriminated against. Gypsies were discriminated against. Jehovah's Witnesses were discriminated against. I still don't know why Jehovah's Witnesses were discriminated against, but they were. Okay, we don't like Jehovah's Witnesses in this room. Is that what we're laughing at? Okay, I'm not going to dig into that one. Okay, now, opposition to the Nazi regime. This one, guys, is a bit of a tricky one, but it's still good to go over. First thing you need to acknowledge is there was very little opposition due to the Nazi state's great ability to crush any opposition from within the party and in the public. They would repress anything that was going to come up to challenge them. Despite this, there were small pockets of opposition, and that was most evident in the youth. Okay. So, before we go into this, I will add there was some forms of Lutheranism and confessional churches that were established in Germany that were very, very under the rug kind of church or congregations that tried to be anti the Nazi party or anti the regime, but they weren't very successful. These two, first one, were known as the swing youth. Swing was a style of music back then and dance. So swing, was a dance. The music was jazzy blues. Okay, but it came from America and England, and so was seen as an anti-Nazi kind of music and culture. It was definitely followed by middle-class Germans, so the wealthier Germans. They listened to jazz and swing music. They wore English clothing, and it wasn't like overt opposition, but it was a direct challenge to the idea of Gleichschaltung, which is coordination. The idea about total obedience. They weren't obeying what they're being told. So there was common things where they would be like in a basement in a place in the city. The SA would come in, and they would smash the windows, come in, beat up a few of them, arrest them, whatnot. Then there were these ones. I love these guys. The Edelweiss pirates. They were just working class Germans who enjoyed hanging out together. So they'd go hiking, they'd go camping, but they used to directly challenge the pre-existing Hitler Youth groups. They didn't want to be part of Hitler Youth, but they wanted to do similar things to Hitler Youth, but just do it on their own accord. And so it's recorded that they would sometimes wait around for Hitler Youth to come along and pick fights with them, as like a challenge to the status quo, the hierarchy. So they're two. If you ever talk about opposition, they're two ones you can bring up. But also small factions of Protestant churches in Germany as well. All right, we're nearly there, guys. We're nearly there. Search of Peace. This one's very simple. It's all relational, guys. It starts with League of Nations. You go into Japan, Germany, and German ambitions, Japanese ambitions, and then you go into United Nations. So you start with the League of Nations. You go to Germany, you go to Japan, and then United Nations. So I'm going to go this really quickly. But League of Nations, their intention post-World War I was to use the notion of internationalism, which was established by Woodrow Wilson, to unite nations, to use diplomacy, to resolve international disputes, which is known as collective security. The authority they had, the League of Nations could not regulate consequences. They couldn't militarize, and therefore they were not taken seriously, which meant that they had no authority. So they were established in 1919. They were lacking in international unity, and as a result, it ended in 1945 with the creation of the United Nations. Okay? This goes into during this time the League of Nations is around. You have the Japanese and the German who have got extreme ambitions. For Japan, their foreign policy was driven by aggressive expansion, strongly influenced by the military. They challenged America's trading agreements with China in 1915. So you've got the open door policy versus the 21 demands. They invaded Manchuria in 31. They invaded China in 37. And in response to the moral trade embargoes from America and Britain, Japan had bombed Pearl Harbor in 1941. Okay? For Germany, during a similar time, they have Lebensraum, which means living space. They want to expand their influence and territory. That's what their ambitions are. Hitler also wants to restore Germany's honor. He wants to destroy the Treaty of Versailles. Hitler also wants to achieve a greater Germany. He wants to unite all German-speaking people. And this is very evident in regards to the military expansionism and aspirations or ambitions, is that when Hitler withdrew from the League of Nations in 1933 and actively began to rearm the German nation, a violation of the League of Nations and Treaty of Versailles. But nothing happened. So, lastly, the United Nations. Was the United Nations just a League of Nations version 2.0? Okay. It was established in 1945, post-World War II. Its intentions were to maintain international peace, promote diplomacy, and improve lives. And its authority, there are questions around its authority because since it's been around, they've had an inability to achieve disarmament. They have had an inability to stop the continuation of nuclear weapons. And they've also got a bad rap sheet for not stepping in and stopping genocide. And in a number of countries, we look at Eastern Europe, we look at the Balkans, we look at Rwanda, Darfur, North Sudan, also Sudan, sorry. There's a range of them. Yeah. So that's the whole syllabus. Okay, that's a lot to take in, isn't it? I'm going to upload this to the classroom. I'm going to upload the recording. But I know you're probably done. You're like so ready to go home. I'm just going to go through a few questions.
So for this section, it's just short answers, yeah?
So and differing range. So just before we start, some of the questions may not have sources with them. Does that make sense? So one question might just say something about, ask you about the United Nations, League of Nations, and it might be a 3-marker. You know what I mean? Other ones will have sources. I'm just going to go through 3 different styles of questions with sources. So the first one, all right, 15 marker, and Miss Emmy may have gone through these, I'm not sure. But anyway, 15 marker, discuss the use of censorship and propaganda under the Nazi regime. Use sources B, C, and D, and your own knowledge. So before we even look at the sources, you need to start, it's really important with these questions, whether you do it mentally or you actually do it on paper. Because when you got that exam paper, that's your exam paper, guys. You go to town on it. If you want to plan, write on it, go to town. Yeah? Don't, not write on it thinking you're not allowed to. Discuss, first thing, you need to identify the issues and provide points for and or against. All right? Censorship and propaganda under the Nazi regime. One thing I've noticed with this is the first time any year group sat this specific section in the HSC or trials. One thing I've noticed from the practice ones they've sort of put up on the internet and stuff is that they're always, even when it's like a source, they're always using the syllabus. So you always need to identify, guys, what is the syllabus focus. Does that make sense? That's what you need. That's where your own knowledge has got to come from. So it's really important, even though there are sources, guys, you need to know your syllabus. Because if you don't know your syllabus, you're not using your own knowledge. Does that make sense? Okay? So, censorship and propaganda on the Nazi regime, that is the syllabus focus. That's what you need to be knowing about. Alright? And your own knowledge. This is the foundation of your response. For this kind of question, your own knowledge is what you're relying on. And then, it always goes before the source. Alright? And so then, you then use the sources to support your own knowledge. It's really important, guys, when it says use sources B, C, and D, you need to use all 3. You need to refer to all 3 in your response. Yeah? Okay? So these are some of the sources. So what you want to do, the first one.
So,
yeah.
You know our paragraph topics? Do we center them around our own knowledge or around the sources?
100% your own knowledge. So this is what you can do, which is quite, you can be savvy. This is where you work smarter rather than harder. what you want to do with this kind of thing, guys, I would recommend before you still look at the sources, but I would look at the question and identify the syllabus focus and ask yourself, what do I know? What do I know first? Then you're looking at the sources, and you're like, okay, this is a quote from Goebbels, all right? If you tell a lie big enough and keep repeating it, people will eventually come to believe it. The lie can be maintained only for such time as the state can shield the people from the political, economic, and military consequences of the lie. It thus becomes vitally important for the state to use all of its powers to repress dissent, for the truth is the mortal enemy of the lie, and thus by extension the truth is the greatest enemy of the state. So when we look at censorship and propaganda, what could you guys, when you start thinking about it, you read that and you think, what can I relate that to?
Establishment of the right chamber of culture.
Yeah, you can talk about culture, but you can talk about the truth is the greatest enemy of the state. You can talk about censorship. You can talk about how you can start off by talking about that the one way the Nazi state. So if you're looking at the question, okay, the Nazi regime effectively used censorship to control its civilian population. This is most evident through the establishment of the German News Bureau in whatever year that was a thing, which controlled all aspects of newspaper publications, and media productions, film exhibitions, whatever. Okay, you elaborate on your own knowledge, and then you can say the importance of censoring the truth is most evident in source B when Joseph Goebbels states, quote, "The truth is the greatest enemy of the state," end quote. You've got to use it to support what you're saying. If you start with the source, you're saying to me or Miss Emmy, I actually have no own knowledge. Does that make sense? You need to start, like this is what you got to start thinking about. Yeah.
Don't you use your own knowledge to address limitations as well, though?
100%.
Like, if this is what the source is missing, and this is what they forgot to put in it, so...
You don't need to address limitations. In other questions I'm going to put up in a moment, you definitely address limitations.
We're not making a judgment, so just discuss.
No, you're not making a judgment. So what you do here is if there are limitations and you can fill the limitation, that's your own knowledge. Yeah? But the thing is, guys, one way you want to start doing it, because I think students fall into the trap with this question. They see this, and they go, okay. They go to source B, and they start getting ideas. They go to source C, get some ideas. Go to source D, they get some ideas. And then when they start writing, all their ideas are the source. Maybe try just to think about, how can I answer this? If there were no sources, how would you answer that? Okay? And then start thinking about what matches up, what else you can talk about. Yeah.
This is basically just like a question you would usually be asked, but they're just giving you the evidence.
Absolutely. Essentially, it's like I give you 3 historical references, and then I give you a question, and I'm like, you got to answer this, but you got to use these 3 historians.
But when it says evaluate the usefulness of the source, that's...
We're going to get to that, yeah. Okay? Does that kind of make sense, guys? So, here's some key takeaways, guys. When you get a question that uses language like this, using sources, whatever, and your own knowledge, and then the question, whatever it is, okay? Firstly, interpret the question, plus identify what the syllabus focus is. Yep? Second thing you do is use your own knowledge first. Third thing you do is then support your knowledge with the sources, all of them. If there's 2 sources, use all of them. If there's 1, just use the 1. And lastly, guys, always answer the question. So even if you're halfway through, just clarify, am I still answering the question? I know it seems silly, but I've been there time and time again before with essays, and sometimes I'll read a whole paragraph and I'm like, I just totally gone off on a random tangent. Kind of like for my students, the way I teach. You know, sometimes I'm 20 minutes in, I'm like, hang on, what am I teaching here? It's that kind of thing. All right? Yeah. All right, so this, guys, this is one you really need to have your head screwed on for, okay? So, but in all seriousness, it's a really tricky question, and it can throw you. So the question is, account for the perspective of source A. What does it reveal about the education in Nazi Germany? You've got to support this analysis with your own knowledge. Okay, so firstly, account. You need to state reasons for. All right. So what you're stating is you're stating reasons. You're stating what aspects of the perspective of the source. What aspects does it reveal about education in Nazi Germany? Okay. So therefore, something Josh brought up before, you also bring up what it doesn't bring up too. So what is the perspective limiting in what it reveals as well? Does that make sense? So we'll talk about that. Perspective of source A. When you're looking at perspective, the first thing you should be looking at when you're looking at source is who is the author, who is the intended audience, and what is the aim/purpose of that source. That will start to give you some ideas. And they're talking points for you in this response. But sorry guys, it's a 7-mark question.
What about bias and influence?
Yeah, you can still acknowledge that stuff. It's got more to do with reliability, but you definitely can still bring that in. Guys, this is just a foundational analysis. You can go further. Yep.
So your answer should be centered around the source.
Yes, because it's saying account for the perspective. So what does it, source A, reveal about education in Nazi Germany? Okay?
And your own knowledge would usually be the limitations.
Yeah, totally. Exactly right. The thing is that your own knowledge is also going to tell you what's the perspective telling you as well. Does that make sense? But the thing is, when it's saying what does it, you can't just say like a response. You won't get good marks if you're just saying source A reveals this about Nazi education. You need to start referring to the perspective as well. Does that make sense? So what does it reveal about Nazi education in Nazi Germany? This is the link to the syllabus. What does it reveal? Plus, what is it lacking? Okay, what's causing it to be lacking, or what's causing it to reveal great information? That's where you can acknowledge authenticity, motive, reliability. Your own knowledge, guys, this determines how much source A reveals about the topic. So this is the source. It's a source A is a letter by a German geography teacher writing in 1938. I'm trying through the teaching of geography to do everything in my power to give the boys knowledge, and I hope later on, judgment, so that as they grow older, the Nazi fever dies down and it again becomes possible to offer some opposition. They may be prepared. There are 4 or 5 masters who are non-Nazis left in our school now. We all work on the same plan. If we leave, Nazis will come in and there'll be no honest teaching in the whole school. But if I went to America and left others to do it, would that be honest? Or are the honest people those in prison cells? If only there could be some collective action amongst teachers. But we cannot meet in conference. We cannot have a newspaper. Whew. So, that's a hard source too. So let's go through perspective very quickly.
German teacher.
So okay, we know it's a German teacher, so it's a primary source, written during the time for German teacher, yeah?
Anti-Nazi.
Okay, good. Okay, so yeah, let's go through. So, who is the author? We don't know if it's a man or a woman, but we know that the author is a German geography teacher, okay, of the time. Who is the intended audience? It's a letter. If it's a letter, guys, who would you be usually writing a letter to? Yeah, loved ones, someone close, parents, loved ones. It's more than likely, guys, but based on the nature of what's being written in it, you're sending it to someone who you what? Trust. Okay? The intended audience is someone who's a trusted friend, loved one, or confidant. So you're thinking that confidant is someone you trust in, you confide in, okay? But it's dealing with sensitive material, and you could therefore, if you're going down that vein, that could possibly increase the reliability of the source. Okay? Does that make sense? And what's the aim/purpose of this source?
To inform.
Yeah, to inform, to share a little bit of feelings, I think, as well, which can also limit the reliability there too. What does it reveal about an education in Nazi Germany?
That the school's filled in German, Nazi people, pro-Nazi.
Okay, so it's got a pro-Nazi agenda. Yeah. It also
people who are anti-Nazi don't have a platform to talk about it.
Yeah, good. It also reveals that there are some small factions of anti-Nazi sentiment in 1938 in German schools.
And the hidden agendas.
What about hidden agendas? What about you could mention things like Gleichschaltung, the idea about total obedience. That's what they're trying to create there. Talk about people's community, everyone working harmoniously, but they're trying to show that that's what's trying to happen. What do you say? What else is limited there, though? What is it lacking? The Nazi viewpoint? What's one thing about this perspective that might limit its reliability?
Specific things of the education system.
Yeah.
we're talking about.
Yeah, so it might give you specific views about someone who's anti-Nazi about the education system, but it's not talking about the curriculum. Yeah, not talking about specific learning. Yeah. And the other big one is, guys, you need to acknowledge is that it's a very, very anti-Nazi view. Like, as much as I don't think anyone is not sympathising with this person, but you need to at sometimes acknowledge if what it's revealing is it can also limit its reliability too, because it might be very, very swayed to. It might be to inform someone in the letter, but it might also be to sway them too. Okay. So perspective, you're going to be bringing in stuff around reliability. This is, I'm not going to lie, guys, this is a tricky question. My only bit of advice, or my extra bit of advice regarding this one, is you need to be referring to perspective, using different things to refer back to it, okay? But there's nothing wrong. This is what some students who are really good at source analysis I've read from other years, that the ones that do really well are sometimes ones who acknowledge things they don't know. Sometimes students, if they don't, the information's not there, and it's not even your own knowledge, you can't know. They try to just fill that gap. Sometimes a really sophisticated bit of writing acknowledges the gaps as well that you don't know, which can limit perspective. Okay, and just you start thinking about if you come across a source where you're like, actually, well, this is unreliable because of this, this, and this, and then but you sometimes acknowledge, well. Although it doesn't show this, it can still be reliable for this reason. You've got to look for both sides too. All right, but the key takeaways. When you're looking at perspective, origin, audience, aim, thinking about what that provides, what does that limit, also how does it improve reliability, how does it limit reliability. Okay, you need to identify what the syllabus focus is. You need to link your knowledge of the syllabus focus to the perspective, and you always need to answer the question. Yeah? Sorry, guys, very quickly. One last question. I'm sorry, I'll be very quick.
Why sorry?
Okay? I can see, I'm good with body language. People are getting restless. Okay? So, to what extent are sources B and C evidence of opposition to the Nazi regime? This is another one you can get. They're changing it. Evidence of. Okay? Using the sources and your own knowledge to discuss the manifestation and outcomes of resistance to the regime. This might give you an idea. We don't have a lot of information. You might need to look up what the outcomes of opposition are. In regards to the confessional churches and the Lutheran churches, most of them were executed or arrested. Swing youth, they were usually arrested, beaten up, or try to disband them. The Edelweiss pirates, I really don't know. Sorry? Yeah, definitely left. Well, they would have, because they're youth, they're not going to do too much to them, but they still would have responded. So, very quickly, to what extent? Guys, you need to make a judgment. Use high modality, low modality, neutral modality. So great extent, moderate extent, little extent. The big thing is, guys, you need to be making a judgment based on both sources. Okay? You can't be doing it separately. Do it together. So sources B and C, how much evidence are they showing? It's okay. If they're not showing much evidence, then acknowledge they're not showing much evidence. Okay? Evidence plus your own knowledge, guys. Your own knowledge of the syllabus will allow you to determine how much evidence the sources are showing. Does that make sense? If you don't know the syllabus, you will not be able to answer the question appropriately.
So,
yeah.
You do a paragraph on why they would be good.
Well, let's look at the mark. 12 marks. Yeah, you could do a paragraph on source B, paragraph on source C, I reckon.
And then one on what both of them mean.
Yeah, I think you simplify it. If you're going to do a paragraph on source B, you just cover the whole thing and then do one on source C, or you focus on themes and integrate. Guys, opposition to Nazi regime, that is your syllabus focus. This is a real thrower. I think some students, they got this question, they would get confused because they read this bit because there's another question, which says discuss the manifestation and outcome of resistance to the regime. That is not the question. This is the question. What this is, it's a guideline. It's guiding you. It's giving you direction on how you should write about opposition. Does that make sense? So it's asking you, the main question is saying, how much do you think sources B and C give you evidence of opposition to the Nazi regime? And when you're talking about that, they want you to talk about, in regards to sources B and C, what evidence it gives you of the manifestation and outcome of resistance. Using that and your own knowledge.
Are we talking about usefulness in this question or just reliability?
No, so evidence is what do they tell you? Yeah. And so this is where your knowledge comes in, because if you got something like this, source B, an image of the Edelweiss pirates, the reality is, how much evidence is that giving you of opposition? Their clothing. Yeah. Well, the thing is, it's giving you information about who you are, but if you didn't know this from your syllabus dot point, you'd have no idea that they're opposition, right? They could look like Hitler Youth for a second. Not without uniforms, but this is where you've got to start making a really clear judgment. How much evidence is that giving you? It's not giving you a lot. It's clarifying what the focus is, but you need to go beyond what this photo tells you to be able to say what opposition they imposed on the Nazi regime. Yeah? The same with, so this one's a little bit better. So, and then source C. Where you direct the false doctrines with the state beyond a special mission, Okay? And that is more so, that's their statement against the Nazi regime and their sort of stance on certain things. But the big thing here, guys, you need to know your syllabus. Okay? And for this one, guys, if you get a question that talks about to what extent the source is evidence of... Oh, sorry, question?
Yeah, I was going to say, so could you say source B provides information about manifestation but not...
Yeah, outcomes?
Yeah.
100%. So you could be saying that... well, that's where you'd be making, we might say, a minimal extent or to a moderate extent, because, yeah, it gives great evidence on this, but it's lacking in this, and then you go into it. Yeah? That's a really good point. So did everyone hear that? Yeah? So lastly, guys, sorry. You need to identify what the syllabus focus is first. You need to know what you'd be looking at when you get source evidence of. You need to analyze the sources. Do they match your knowledge? Okay, what's missing? What can you get from it? Make a judgment based off evidence and own knowledge, and always answer the question. Refer back to the question. Guys, I think, is that it? That's a wrap. I hope you got something out of that, and I will upload it very, very